Mackintosh, Chief Economist at Nasdaq, for an update on the latest COVID-19 news, the US and global economies, and how investors are reacting to the impact of the coronavirus. And Phil, it looks as if big ticket items are showing signs of recovery.
Yeah, some of the data that's coming out is looking pretty promising. I mean, we've talked a little bit about how people are returning to stores and retail sales are starting to tick up. But a couple of data points we're looking at today shows that people are on the hunt for houses and for new cars. And that's kind of interesting because if you compare it to what we saw coming out of China, we knew a long time ago that actually the congestion on the roads had increased back to normal levels pretty quickly, whereas people were still avoiding public transport. They were still avoiding the subway. It looks in the China data like actually the amount of public transport usage for longer trips is still about 50% of normal. Although the subway is now caught up and past that, and it's back to 75% of normal. Congestion has been back to normal for over a month. So you can kind of see people's behaviors changing in a post-coronavirus world where they're driving themselves to work and not hopping on public transport. And even in China, we saw the purchases of homes and sales activity back to normal within a couple of months. So the data that's come out of China indicates what's happening in the US is probably expected, but it's probably also a behavioral shift, right? Because you've got people that maybe cooped up in New York City in an apartment and are looking forward to getting out to their own house with a yard where there's a little bit more safety and distancing from coronavirus, and potentially also now looking for cars to drive themselves back to work. So you can kind of see some changes to customer behavior coming through the data already.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how everyone bottlenecks into the city from New Jersey, New York suburbs, Connecticut. Let's get an update on our COVID-19 cases. And today we're taking a look at Iran's second wave and what's happening with Sweden's curve, which looks pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've been very focused on getting back to work for the economy, but then there's the health implications for that and whether we get that second wave from people being back in social contact. Looking at the European data, it looks pretty good. I mean, Italy, Spain, Germany, even the UK has not seen a spike in cases. So from that perspective, those countries are about 2 weeks ahead of us and they seem to be getting back to work successfully in their phased approach. But obviously, Iran is one of the case studies showing the opposite, where they have reportedly gone back to work too quickly. They haven't got testing in place. They haven't got contact tracing in place. And so as everyone's gone back and got back in contact, new cases have spiked, and it looks from the data like they're back almost to their original peak levels. Of course, Sweden is the other interesting case study country because they've never really locked themselves down, but they have got the new case growth under control. What we're seeing in the data, though, is Sweden is they really haven't tackled the new case levels very well at all. So even America, we're starting to see cases come down America-wide. We've kind of got about 60 to 70% of the peak cases now. The UK has done even better than that, and Europe has done way better than that. They're down to sort of 10% of peak now, which means when you go back out into public, the probability of you bumping into somebody with a case has gone way down. And then that's potentially a longer term problem for Sweden. We already saw in the data that just because people's behavior changed anyway, it looked like their production and GDP was down about 80%, the same amount as other countries with lockdowns. So this is an interesting case study for the trade-off between keeping things open, but actually not having people prolong the shutdown for longer.
Yeah, and I hope we can continue to see those declines in cases, considering what's happening here in the United States with so many people congregating around our larger cities. But let's wrap up and go back to China for a moment. And you have a chart here that talks about random testing and what they're finding.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of interesting because we're talking about testing being a way to at least find out who shouldn't be getting back into social contact and isolating them rather than all of us on the off chance that the person we bump into has coronavirus. And obviously, one of the big problems is that not only is coronavirus being spread in airborne particles, but a lot of people that catch it are asymptomatic but still spreading it. So this data coming out of China makes it look like for most of the last 2 months, there's been more cases that are positive of asymptomatic carriers than symptomatic carriers. And so unless you've got enough testing going on that you can actually locate these people that aren't sick and don't know they've got it, and find out if they're positive and take them out of society just for a little bit, it's really difficult to tackle the problem. And that's where Iran is having a big problem as well, because they don't know who's carrying it and who's infecting others who will become symptomatic. The other thing that I guess this raises is if this many people are asymptomatic, some of the solutions that we typically use for viruses and for detecting fever, like heat guns, might not be anywhere near as effective for coronavirus. So it really does come down to rapid testing and knowing every day that the people that are all going to work with us or sitting on the train with us are pretty confident that they haven't got a positive test recently.
All right, Phil, thanks for joining me as always.
Thanks, Jill.
All right, thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.